Hey everyone, welcome to week 5. So week 5 only has one part, part A, because of the midterm exam earlier this week. In this part A, we are going to cover two topics. We're going to cover the random module, which is the third of 3 modules we are going to talk about in this class, and also a topic called exceptions. Alright, so quick review. A couple weeks ago now we talked about libraries. So again, a library is a collection of code that you can use in your own code. It's code that's already been written and is available. A standard library is a library that is part of the programming language by default. We've already talked about 2 modules or 2 files in the Python standard library. We've talked about math and we've talked about turtle. Today we're going to talk about a third module called random. So this is another one that is in the Python standard library, which means this is already installed on your computer. It came installed when you downloaded Python. So the random module is kind of what it sounds like. It's going to be a module that helps us sort of generate randomness. So this sort of base idea behind this is you can use random numbers for a lot of different things in programming. So for example, games use random numbers. For example, if you're trying to determine whether or not you make a critical hit, generally it's some sort of, random number choice that happens to determine whether or not it happens. Simulation programs, so programs such as, programs that sort of simulate real world sort of scenarios that maybe have a little bit of randomness in them. That can be a random module can be used for simulation programs, statistical programs as well. Computer security, we will talk a little bit more in detail about cryptography and computer security later. But again, random numbers, super useful for a lot of different applications of computer science. Alright, so just like all the other modules that we've talked about, when you want to use the random module, you first have to import it. Now, you can import it in any one of those 3 ways that we've talked about a couple weeks ago. For this video, I'm just going to assume that we did import random, which does mean whenever you use anything from the random module, you need to type random dot in front of whatever you use. So if you want, you can go ahead and make a file in idle, and whatever you do, just don't name it random. You can name it random practice or anything like that you want, but don't name it random.py, just because the module that we are importing, when we say, hey, import random, is a file named random.py. So just make sure you don't name your own file random. Alright, so we're going to talk about 3 different things in random. Now there's a lot of different things in random, but we're just going to cover 3. So first one we'll talk about is something called randint. So this is a function that has 2 parameters. So you can give it a min and a max. So the min and max have to be an integer type, or they can be a floating point type as long as the number that's a floating point has 0.0 in the decimal place. So it basically has to be an integer or floating point that doesn't have anything in that decimal place. So what this does, this will return, so this will give you back a random integer between min and max, between these 2 numbers that you give it through as arguments. Something that's interesting though is that it is inclusive, meaning unlike range, it includes whatever that second argument is. So let's say, for example, I say random.randint 1, 5. That will give me a random integer either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. It includes the last one. Alright, so here's an example. I'll go ahead and make a file and just sort of follow along with you. So this is an example of a for loop. So this is going to run 10 times, and each time the for loop runs, it will print some random integer between 1 and 100. So let me go ahead and make a file with you. Again, you need to first import random. And then let's go ahead and add this. So if we save this, and again, make sure you do not name it random. Random example is fine though. And then if we run it, it will go ahead and print 10 random integers between 1 and 100. There they are. And the cool thing about random is if I run it again, it will give me 10 more random integers. So this is sort of the cool thing, the benefit of using the random module is that it will add this randomness into your code, meaning the next time you run the code, it might do something slightly different. Alright, there is a function called randRange. So this is a lot like the range function, but instead of, generating a sequence of numbers like range does, it just returns a randomly selected value from what that range would generate. So again, standard rules of range apply here, so it can take 1, 2, or 3 arguments, and the rules about the stopping number not being included, that does happen here. Unlike randInt. So randRange, again, it basically does the range, but instead of, going through each one of the numbers one at a time that the range generates, it picks one of them at random. So here are a couple examples. If you are following along with a Python file, feel free to, write up these examples and run it a couple of times, right? Because the whole idea of random is that it will generate different things each time. So again, standard rules of range apply here. So you, again, can have 1, 2, or 3 arguments. The way it behaves depends on, how many arguments you have, and then it will select a number at random from the sequence of numbers that would normally be generated by, just the normal range function that we've already seen a couple times now. Alright, one more that I want to talk about from the random module is called choice. This one is pretty powerful, so to use it you do random.choice, and then in the parentheses you give it some sequence. Alright, so sequence can be any sequence. So far the only sequence we've seen are strings, right? Again, strings are sequences of characters. So this will give you a random element from the sequence. So let's say, for example, the sequence that you give it is a string. This will give you a random character from that string. So it's pretty cool. You give it a sequence, chooses a random thing from it, and can be very useful in your code. So again, here is another example if you want to follow along and type this into your Python file that you're writing up right now. So in this case, we have a string named letters, and it's basically, all the lowercase letters A through Z. And then I use random.choice to print a single letter from, or a single character, I should say, from this letter string. And again, cool thing about this is that every time I run this code, it will give me a different letter each time. That said, there are a lot more functions in the random module. So just like, with the turtle module, we only had time to cover, a subset of everything that you have at your fingertips to use from that module. Same thing with random. I've just showed you 3. There are plenty more, and you can find all of them in the Python docs. So I have linked the Python docs about random on Canvas, so you can go ahead and check out that link. That said, for this class, you only need to know how randInt, randRange, and choice work. So again, you should remember, the rules about importing, the 3 different ways to import. All that applies also to the random module, and then specific for random, you should know how randInt, randRange, and choice work. So basically the ones we just talked about today. But if this sounds really cool and you think you might be interested in, learning about other things in the random module, feel free to spend some time taking a look at the Python docs. There's a lot of cool random functions in here. So